And then if you're joining us on the live stream, you can buy the book in the link in your description. So as a Kenny lover myself, these essays are the sweetest treat imaginable. I love this book so much from Emma Eisenberg, who says, so I would read Sarah Perry to write about doorknobs. How lucky for us that she turns her precise, searching, and funny voice to the subject of candy. What Perry has created there is nothing less than a wholly original exploration of how we eat, love, and experience pleasure. So if that doesn't make you want to read this, I don't know what will. Sarah Perry is the author of the memoir After the Eclipse, which was named a New York Times Book Review Editor's Choice, a Poet and Writer's notable nonfiction debut, and a Barnes & Noble Discover Great New Writer's Pick. Perry is the recipient of the 2018 Betty Burzon Emerging Writer Award and was nominated for the 2024 MFK Fisher Distinguished Writing Award from the James Beard Foundation. She holds an MFA in nonfiction from Columbia University, was a 2019 McGee Distinguished Professor of Creative Writing at Davidson College, and teaches in the graduate program in creative writing at Colorado State University. Forsyth Harmon is the author of Justine. She's also the illustrator of national bestseller Girlhood by Melissa Filos and The Art of the Affair by Catherine Lacey. Forsyth's work has been featured in Grant of Bomb of 1929, The Believer and Elsewhere, both a BA and an MFA from the University of New York. Without further ado, let's all start.
Oops. Hi. Hello, everyone. I told you these fell off my nose. But they're so cute. It's worth it. Hi, everybody. I keep wanting to say individual hellos to people who are here. Like, oh my God, you're here. Oh my God, you're here. Thank you, everyone, for coming out. So I'll begin with a reading, short reading, and then we'll have some discussion up here. Can everyone hear me? Great. So this is on candy cigarettes. In Oklahoma, you can still get these at the gas station. They're not called cigarettes, but we know what they are. We can recognize that fake Marlboro box, red with a sharp chevron down the front, the pack so pleasingly like the one your mother's boyfriend carried around, threw on the coffee table. Sorry, I'm new to this object. With the nonchalance you only hope to grow into as you reached adulthood, strong and long-limbed, both attached to and carelessly chucking what you most needed and craved wherever you went. Of course, this box is slightly smaller, kid-sized. There were two kinds of candy cigarettes. The first kind, more common in my 1980s Maine childhood, were hard sticks of pink gum wrapped in delicate paper, just like a real cigarette, with a little tan filter printed on the end. You could clutch these tightly between first and middle finger, puffing and dragging away, breathing in the bubblegum scent and pretending that adult vices would be so sweet. You could stand mock angrily in your backyard, surveying the grass with a hand on your hip and pulling dramatically with the other, exhaling with all the sharp irritation of an old-fashioned movie star, glaring into the middle distance and thinking of the lover who deserted her, the man who was in love with the sea, with the war, with the high, flat distances of the prairie. Even as a child, I always identified with the lover, the horror in satin and feathers, the stubborn loner fucking the priest, over the wife, the mother, the maiden demurely waiting to be selected. During the 1994 Winter Olympics, when I was 12, I was firmly Teen Tanya. That's right. Shout out to my Tanyas. It's all of you. That's why you're here. The bad girls had better outfits, spoke with more electricity, moved with more flow and energy, and if they were abandoned and miserable, at least they were free, and didn't have to do needlepoint on the settee in the evenings. They were the only women who could smoke, and they did, transforming fire into cloud with the force of their breath, the allure of their mouths stilling restless men, at least for a while. I spent a lot of time alone in the woods as a child, and this was the best place for fantasy, for practicing sex in my head. The woods, where no one could see me, was the perfect place to candy smoke with the air of French ennui, with the anger of a motorcycle chick, with the refinement of the tomboy princess who learned sword fighting from a besotted male cousin. I craved privacy because I knew these performances made my mother uncomfortable. She rarely bought me candy cigarettes, understanding how easily emulation becomes practice. She perhaps felt guilty for smoking until I was 7, when she gave it up cold turkey after getting pneumonia. But her boyfriend, Dale, would insist candy cigarettes were harmless, and deep down she understood. She, who had hitchhiked to visit her older boyfriend in juvenile detention when she was 13, the sweet girl, then good mom, who knew how to sneak away occasionally for a wild time. Candy cigarettes, then, were always an indulgence, a tacit recognition of that same simmering wildness in me, an admission that smoking was, let's admit it, sexy and cool. I have gravitated towards sexy things for as long as I can remember. For my 6th birthday, I desperately wanted a shiny red leather jacket. I somehow must have seen Michael Jackson's from the Thriller video, even though we didn't have cable, and so I wanted not only a sexy thing, but a man's thing, the thing of a man whose power came from glamour. I was a year or 2 away from discovering a lifelong love of David Bowie. That Christmas, I didn't get that jacket. Where would my mother have found such a thing in a child's size? She did, however, give me bright red suede boots. I think now of our rural malls, the Ames over New Hampshire, no sales tax, its low ceilings traced by long fluorescent bulbs, the indoor-outdoor carpeting of its dressing rooms, strewn with straight pins and clear plastic clips, and the little store farther down, past the plastic ferns under a stark geometric skylight, the one that sold women's clothes for going out, teal satins and bugle bead embroidery and cropped acid-wash denim jackets. I would give anything to go shopping with her again. I would buy anything she thought looked good on me and wear it every day I could. I would buy her anything she wanted, no layaway. I think of her scouring these places, perhaps a TJ Maxx or 2, thinking of my fervent red leather wish, wondering how she could translate it into what was at hand in those pre-internet days, and finding those boots. I loved them the second I laid eyes on them. They were flat, with a pointed toe and a slouchy ankle shaft that, and this was the coolest part, you could roll down to make a cuff. 2 boots in one, soft as kittens. I wore them to death. I wore them on the playground and while doing homework at the kitchen table. I wore them to visit family and to sleepovers. No one could argue that they were inappropriate. They were flat, after all, and in a child's size, although big when I got them, with room to grow. But they were bright red and sexy. There was no getting around it. And they were perfect. I candy smoked in them with abandon, standing in our patchy backyard, staring into the stand of cattails beyond, or sitting on the swings my father, Tom, had bought me during one of our visitation weekends that we'd painted splotchily, yellow and orange, during a rare weekend visit. Why I had picked those colors, I have no idea, as they were my least favorite. I must have thought they'd be cheery, but I always imagined that swing set sallow against a gray, overcast sky, which would have suited the moodiness of my smoking, it's true. Smoking and thinking of my father, consciously or unconsciously, well into the parliaments of my 20s. The other kind of candy cigarette was a narrow, chalky white candy stick, no wrapper, with a bright red end. If you blew through these instead of sucking, you could sometimes see a tiny puff of sugar in the air. My mother showed me this, despite whatever anxieties she had about my future habits. It's true that sometimes you had to imagine the puff, but that was easy enough to do. Although they lacked the printed filter of the gum kind, the performance was more seamless. No awkwardly pausing to peel back the mouth-wetted paper, biting off gum, which you then had to chew, the pinkness of which reminded you of your kid status, your little girlness. Chewing gum while smoking was awkward and not a thing you saw done by adults. With the candy stick, you just nipped the end when it started to disintegrate, dissolving it in your mouth, the thing neatly shortening like it was burning down. It had no flavor, really, nothing much to distract from the illusion. But if you gripped the stick too hard, it broke apart in your fingers, and you couldn't pack them. Couldn't smack the end of the box against an open palm like adults did, or they'd break into pieces. You loved it when your mother's boyfriend packed his cigs, especially if he was doing something else at the time, like talking to your mother. You could sense the anticipation of pleasure in the act, the practice slaps, the smooth peel of the wrapper as he pulled the little red tab. Your smoking was all about anticipation, too, thinking ahead to the years in which you'd have, you then thought, complete freedom, when you'd be able to make any terrible decision you wanted, when you could be a beautiful, complicated mess, wearing any strange thing you liked, powerful in your little self-destructions, lighting tiny fires wherever you went. Thank you.
Hi. Is the sound okay? Is this a good distance? Okay. Thank you all so much for coming. It's so good to see some of you who I haven't seen in a while and some of you who I've seen very recently. And thank you so much, Sarah, for having me. I'm like really honored to have made illustrations of 100 candies for the 100 essays in this collection. I have been a huge fangirl of Sarah's ever since I read After the Eclipse. I'm actually going to ask for a show of hands who here hasn't read After the Eclipse yet. Okay, I'm actually requiring you to buy it on your way out. I'm going to be checking at the door because this book, like, it's just so gorgeously written, an account of like such bravery, both sort of the life and the retelling of the life in such an incredible structure. It's almost like reading a suspense novel. So I've just been such a big admirer of yours for so long, and so
Sam,
illustrating this book was just such an honor and a pleasure for me. So yeah, I think just to start, I'd really like to just pick out a few phrases from this book, which is also so gorgeously written, so that you can understand the level of mastery sort of brought to the description of candies. So I'm just going to pull out a few before we start asking some questions. So on gumdrops, tiny furrows my teeth made in the gelatin, the cherry or lemon shining clear against the diffuse light from the sugar coating. Like, that's poetry, isn't it? And it's kind of sexy. Page 120 in the with the junior mints. I just found so much pleasure in this book. You'll hear the mints shift down, making a Pavlovian shh, accented with the raindrop percussion of them tumbling against one another. I'm like getting chills. Are you not? Are you I'm a candy person, so I don't know. Are you candy people? It's so funny, when I first started dating my partner, they're like, you're the only adult I know who's like actually always eating candy. But Sarah is the second adult who they know who's always eating candy. What was the Turkish delight? Oh, these are love, gelatin, rose water, finely powdered sugar. It should fill your mouth and nose with the scent of a garden cooling at dusk. Anyway.
I want to interrupt to express my gratitude for Forsyth's care, and also just say if I have any students on the live stream, that's what I want to see in class. Back to the page. Thank you.
I'm reading closely. So obviously this book is about candy. It's about so many other things. It's about pop culture. It's about history. It's about body image. And each candy acts as like a kind of like Proustian Madeline. It's like an entry point for memory. As you heard, like so beautifully done in Sarah's first reading. Can you talk a little bit about the experience you had writing the book, like using candy to access autobiography?
Sure, yeah. So as most of us in this room probably know, After the Eclipse is very sad. It was writing about trauma. It's very hard to write about trauma without re-traumatizing yourself. I know some of you in here understand.
I know, I'm trying to do it too.
It is, yeah. It was a great honor to get that story out into the world, but I was more, it took me longer to recover, and I had ways that I had to work on to recover that I didn't anticipate. So after the eclipse, I was trying to write this sequel memoir that was a lot about like love and sex and romance in the wake of trauma, and how I've navigated that. And then it was 2020, and I just like writing became torture, and like these ways in which I had felt like I could show up for an audience because I was able to process these darker things were like taking such a toll that like I don't even know if their writing was good at the time, and then as writers in the room might have experienced, people in your life will tell you to write about things, right? Everybody. Once somebody tells you to write about something, that's it. It's totally off the table. You don't so my partner, like, really word for word observation of like, you're such a candy freak. This is like, nobody does this. You should write about candy. And I thought, I'm a serious writer, I do important shit here. No. But I was at such a loss that I enacted this practice. I said, okay, I'm going to get up every morning for 100 mornings, and I'm just going to write about a different candy, because candy can't hurt me, right? Like, that's a safe space upon which to just make some sentences. I just wanted to enjoy sentences again. So it didn't matter where they went. They didn't have to be, I wasn't calling them essays. I didn't know what it was. I had this silly habit tracker on my fridge that was 100 circles. So every morning I got to color in my little circle.
So satisfying.
Very reinforcing for an adult who loves candy. Also loves to color, imagine. And then at some point I confessed that I accidentally had made this book-length manuscript to my agent, and she really enjoyed it, and now it's a book. So it was really just like wanting to have a steady pretext for writing so that I could like rehabilitate creativity for myself. And I was writing them mostly out of my head. Like a lot of the research, like deeper research stuff, was like layered in later. I called it essaying them out. Like I wanted to make them a little more hefty. So I didn't do a lot of like Googling or looking around while I was writing them. So of course, like what you always have access to is autobiography, right? So yeah, and they weren't written in the order that's in the book, and they were arranged.
Yeah, it's like really delightful to sort of receive a book without knowing that's what's happening. I hope to have that experience one day. It sounds amazing. It's interesting that I actually didn't know or didn't remember that the book you'd been thinking you were going to work on was about like love, relationships. There's a lot in this book about love, relationships, polyamory. You talk a little bit about the history of exchanging candy as a kind of like sexual advance. You talk about candy sort of supplementing for sex. And you also talk about Preston a lot. Preston's a main character in this book, your partner. Preston, do you want to just give everybody a little wave? You are now meeting one of the main characters of this book.
I think he should stand up and do a little turn, but he's not going to.
Preston also doesn't, quote, care for sweets, by the way, just so you know. But I feel like it'd be great to hear a little bit more about those parts of the book, how they came into the writing, how candy brought them up for you.
Yeah, so I mean, first of all, the partner of a memoirist needs a strong heart. So thank you, Preston. Do you know that everything has been run by the parties of interest? I think, without giving too much away, I really wanted to, like, I found myself getting, you do something 100 times, right? Like, how many different ways can you talk about chocolate melting? Or how many different ways can you talk about, like, the sensation of crunchy candy in your teeth? So, like, as I was writing, I was, like, very close to the bodily experience of what I was doing, which I think kind of made the writing of them into its own sensual practice, which got me, gave me this kind of open door to talk about sexuality in a way that, it's kind of strange how actually this book, like is a permutation of the other book I was trying to write, but I realized that like way later, like when it was totally done, right? And also, shout out to my agent once more, like that's part of her feedback that helped me to take the book seriously, because she said it's so satisfying in that there's like real like physicality in the writing, like, and there's also like maybe a bit of like a party trick, right? Of like, can 100 descriptions of a physical experience be interesting, right? Like, and I think that's like something, I guess that's kind of analogous to writing about sex too. Like, how can we write about this like human experience that can be so like overlaid with cliches and like has all these like expectations upon it, these narrative expectations, like make it something new and unique and interesting, right?
Yeah. A constraint can do wonderful things in the hands of an excellent writer. So yeah, do you want to talk about any of the anecdotes around that specifically, or no?
It's like, I don't know who's on the live stream.
Totally. Okay. No, that's so valid. That's so valid.
I've been lots here, but it's fine.
Yeah. So this isn't like just a memoir and essays. It's also like actually sort of a book of criticism. Some of these are essentially like Yelp reviews of candy, and Sarah takes an extremely strong position. I love the passion. I thought you might read from the bottom of page 264.
Yeah, sure.
I mean, she really had me cracking up over and over again.
This is really fun because I've read from After the Eclipse approximately 9,000 times, and I know it really well, but this is kind of
You're like, ooh, what's page 264?
Yeah, I know. I have no idea what's about to happen. Okay. On gummy orange slices. You can just stop me, right? Am I on the right page?
Are you?
Oh, that's 164.
Yeah,
I'm sorry.
I was like, wait. Okay.
I didn't do my reading. Sorry. At the wafer?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's so funny.
Should I say what they're about?
Yeah, maybe.
Okay. So this is on Ferrero Rocher. The wafer sphere is covered in more chocolate, or that mysterious velvety filling, it's unclear. And the whole thing is rolled in more hazelnut. The effect is macabre. A hazelnut covered in its own cream filling and rolled in the shattered bones of its comrades. The outer hazelnuts are sharp, like tiny gravel, and scrape the roof of your mouth. It's another Inception candy. Like those strawberry foil-wrapped hard candies with a gel center. The difference being that those are good.
I love like the passion that you bring to the subject. And I might get like a little bit controversial because this book does dig into like a few age-old candy conflicts. Mm-hmm. Do you want to talk about any of those, the divisive candies?
Right. So I think the biggest candy rivalry that comes to mind would be Twizzlers versus Red Vines.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a big one.
I think we're planning to call some people out here.
Yeah, who are the Twizzler people in the room? Red Vines?
You're all on the same side.
Red Vines?
How did that happen?
Yeah.
My very own partner. My Donna.
Yeah, there were a couple of other ones too that came up for me. Actually, we did have some conflict in our candy preferences.
We did. I've forgotten.
Yeah,
I repressed it.
Yeah, so Sarah prefers the mini Swedish Fish, while I prefer the regular sized.
We can make peace between our people.
I know. Okay. I prefer sweet tarts to Smarties.
I don't understand.
So it can be really, it's tough.
It's very divisive. I mean, it's been kind of fascinating talking about this book with people. I mean, for one thing, it's often very beautiful. People share these memories they have with me about candy, and they do this thing where they go down. You know, I'm used to people kind of fading out and doing a traumatic recitation thing that I'm receiving. But what I receive with this book instead is people just like glowing and telling me these really moving stories about their grandparents or about their mom or what have you. And the stories, like, pretty quickly, it's been interesting because they'll pretty quickly become not about the candy, mm-hmm. which is what happened when I wrote them too. Like, it just kind of led, and people are just kind of like, having, they're like traveling back in time and they're living it in front of me, and then they kind of come back and they say, wow, I didn't plan to tell you all that, and people have shared like so much emotion with me, but sometimes they're like angry that I didn't write about a certain candy that they love. I actually just ate a bit of honey for the first time. I have heard more people be mad at me about not including bit of honey. Tell you, they're good, but I don't know. I don't know if I could make a whole essay of them.
The collection, though, also sort of doesn't shy away from the bitter. It's not all sweet. In the Haribo Gold Bears chapter, which love a gold bear, you say, in trying to access my personal impressions to the wider world via research, even following a path as sweet as candy, I find violence again and again. So do you want to tell us about that journey?
Yeah, I mean, for one thing, it's me. So, of course, I'm being told to hold the mic down more. Can you hear me now? I'm really, okay, every time I do a reading with a mic, I think, go home and learn how to use a mic. And then I forget. How's this? That sounds way better to me, too. Thank you. Question. Yes, Haribo Gold Bears. It's me, so I'm still going to want to dig into I'm not shying away from the darkness of whatever I'm looking at, I think. Gold bears in particular, as some of you may know. So there previously had been candy of that texture, but the real innovation there that really popularized that candy was making it in the cute shape of the bear. But the original Haribo people in Bonn, Germany, made them bears because dancing bears were very popular at carnivals. And dancing bears were trained to dance by being made to stand on a hot plate over a fire and like Pavlovianly training them to do that sort of motion when they heard music until they didn't need the fire anymore, blah, blah, blah. There's more in the book if you want to learn more. But, anything you research, you keep digging and digging, and you very quickly come upon human conflict, violence, war, animal abuse, racism, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, it was interesting to try to make this thing that acknowledged some of the abuses in the world. And of course, writing a big book about sugar, you have to address slavery a little bit, you have to have it in there, but then that it's not the project of the book, and it's not the project of me and my positionality to be really doing that justice either. So I was kind of always trying to find this balance between making things complicated and nuanced and touching on history and darkness as well without doing so much that it was a strange thing where it's you can go far enough in but not far enough to do it justice, and then you have to kind of pull it back and make it just a reference. Mm-hmm. And some of that too is trusting your audience, to kind of pick up what you're saying with just a kind of a passing reference to what's going on. And two, I wrote this book as a project of creative recovery and trying to get through a very dark time. And then once I started taking it seriously, I thought maybe this could give something to people because we're in this unprecedented dumpster fire time, right? It's 2020. Then it takes a while to publish a book, and there was some point, when would that have been in the last 5 years, where I thought, well, things don't feel so desperate now. Maybe we won't need the Candy Escape book anymore, but here we are.
Here we are. And Trump does come up in the book, actually.
He does, yes. And I had to, there was a point at which recently I had to edit or I think the line is already outdated because it's former president. It doesn't say anything else.
He has a preference for pink starburst, just so you all know.
He loves the pink starburst.
Yeah, I prefer red.
Unfortunately, I prefer pink.
Yeah, it's tough.
That's the right answer. Yeah. So then, it's just me very briefly thinking about what does it mean to very briefly acknowledge the humanity of someone who is the agent of such inhumanity, because I always really am in the camp of if we just, and this came from Eclipse, if we just simplify violence and degradation and all of this to the person is evil, we're not recognizing that there are larger forces at play, or that people ultimately have agency and they're agents who are making decisions who need to be held responsible for that. Yeah.
And yet you do really bring us this like pleasurable gift with this book. I don't know like how many people here feel like their candy consumption has gone up since the election and the inauguration. Like I think mine certainly has. I think actually, reading some of these descriptions is maybe just as good as the eating. And also, too, this book takes a strong point of view sort of on pleasure. And I thought maybe you'd talk about that a little bit.
Yeah. I think something that I was really thinking about when I was honoring what a candy freak I am was just thinking about how much we deny ourselves. And, especially this narrative of guilty pleasures, this whole idea of guilty pleasures, like, drives me crazy. Like, it's like we always have to be, like, assuring our listener that we know we're actually doing something wrong when we're enjoying ourselves, right? Or, like, that we're not narcissistic, or we're not oversexed, or we're not, we're eating healthfully, or we're thinking about, like, ethical consumption, and like the whole idea of any kind of ethical consumption is such a fraught thing, and I think like, because I like, this is I think a room of like a lot of very deep thinkers, and people are really trying to like, be agents of like positive forces in the world, and like do what's right and what's responsible and everything, but like we end up splitting the hairs like to such a ridiculous degree that like we're thinking so much about our own choices, like we're not like raising our gaze to see like the real like insanity and like the real like masochistic forces at play outside of like our wonderful circle, which I'm very grateful to physically be in right now tonight.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's so true. There is like so much earned wisdom throughout this book, as we see in Eclipse as well, for those of us who've read it. It starts with a quote from Baudelaire, a multitude of small delights constitute happiness. And it ends with like a really beautiful meditation on like enjoying the sweetness of those we have around us, and really appreciating like the ephemerality of that. I think like that's actually what I take away from the book more than anything else, is this sense of a limited time that we have to sort of savor what is sweet. Do you want to talk about that at all?
Yeah, I think there always has been a lot happening in the world that we're not fixing on any kind of short timeline, right? And like, so how do we fortify ourselves, and how can we be resilient in the meantime? It seems like a lot to put on candy, but candy is a representation of like being present, enjoying what you can enjoy, honoring your own forces, your own impulse towards pleasure, and like keeping to whatever degree you can, like almost taking it as a responsibility not to be miserable all the time, because if you're not able to like counterbalance thinking about all of this misery, like you're not going to have the bandwidth to help anybody else. At least I'm not. Maybe I'm speaking for myself, obviously, in this book too, but I do kind of want, like, that's sort of, we're always kind of, in the back of your mind, you're always kind of modeling something for a reader, right? Like which I think is a better word than inspire, because inspire feels very live, laugh, love, right? But what can you be modeling for other people? And it's just like, actually like honoring what makes you feel stronger and what makes you feel connected to people too. Like the book is purposefully like not gourmet candy. There might be a couple gourmet candies in there too, but like it's maybe a trash candy, although there are a lot of class discussions in there that hopefully nuance that. But I really want it to be experiences that my readers have likely had, like those very close bodily experiences, so that we can like honor like that thing that happens when people tell me their candy memories, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's so beautiful. Okay, I know you don't love this question, but what is your favorite candy, and or why is this a bad question? Sorry.
How long is the book? That's my answer. These pages. So the whole idea of a favorite is frustrating, right? But I've always had this problem with like any kind of favorite, like favorite music, favorite dinner, like, because I just really feel like it's contextual. Like pleasure is contextual. It depends on, but with candy specifically, like it depends on the weather. Like, is it hot out? Are things gonna melt? Am I in a meeting? Can I open a crinkly wrapper? Like, what kind of mood am I in? You know, like, do I want to eat a sexy candy or do I want to like not eat a sexy candy? Like, do I need to talk? Is my mouth gonna be blue after? You know, like, what am I aiming towards right now? Like, declaring a favorite candy is like asking me what I want to wear on July 18th. Like, I have no idea. But you have to read the book to find out. I'm kidding. When forced, I would say Rolos. People always make a bunch of weird noises about Rolos. I don't understand. And my Gen Z kids tell me they're old-fashioned, which is like news to me. But they're great because they're caramel, but they're not runny, and they don't really stick in your teeth. So they're caramel you can eat at any time. They're in perfect little bite sizes. You can unwrap them gradually as you go. They're good driving candy, you know, because you don't have to fiddle a lot, so you're not going to die on the highway. There's a lot to recommend Rolos. And okay, also, as I was writing and revising the Rolos essay, I realized that this whole, like, this thing I just performed here, like, favorites, whatever. When people ask you your favorite, like, for one thing, like, isn't that what 5-year-olds ask each other to, like, make friends? Like, what's your favorite color? Like, nobody cares about colors. It's just, like, something to bond over, right? And I realized I was, like, pushing people away by not declaring a favorite, because people just want to know, like, do they disagree with you and then you have like a fun little tussle about that, or like, are you similar vibes and you can like celebrate things together? So I guess that's what I learned in this book. You have to arbitrarily select a favorite so you can somehow like be accessible, be legible to people in that moment.
Thanks for doing that for us.
You're welcome.
And
it's out of love for everybody in the room.
Yeah, and thanks for writing this book that's like not only the best candy writing I've ever read, but the best candy packaging writing I have ever read. You guys got to read this. It's incredible. The level of detail around candy packaging is so moving. But I'm going to turn it over to the audience for questions. We want to hear from you too.
I know people, so I can call on them.
Oh, we've got one.
Michael.
So I'm just wondering, was there any candy that as you began working on the essay, you thought that it was going to go one way, and then as you began to work with it and taste it, you began to all of a sudden notice that it made a left turn?
I'll repeat the question for the live stream. So were there any candies that came into the collection that Sarah had thought might sort of go one way in terms of the direction of the essay, but then went another? And were there any surprises in the writing?
Yeah, so I'm a word nerd, so I'm hearing were there is the answer, or an answer. I thought, where there's candies, you think grandma, right? Immediately. And we think this is like a cultural resonance. I mean, not that there are distinct things, but it's from an ad. It's like an identical ad that they reshot in the UK. So there's an English version and an American version. But as I was thinking about Werther's, I started thinking about the sorrows of young Werther, and I was thinking about Goethe, and then I was just, literally this is like one Wikipedia link to another, I gotta say, that was later fact-checked. And then I discovered that like when the monster in Frankenstein was like reading in order to like reach his humanity, like he read the Sorrows of Young Werther, and then I was talking about Bart and the lover and the beloved, and it all just kind of came together, and all of this happened in like 300 words or something. It's a short one, actually. It's just a few paragraphs. It's the most concise thing I've ever written, so it's like very satisfying to me. Yeah. Nicole.
Is there candy that didn't make the cut, and are we sad about that?
Yes. The Nerds clusters rolled in the crunchies. Although I actually like the rope better because it's like a higher it's like a better proportion of chewy to crunchy. And I ate that for the first time while I was writing the book, and they're just bomb. They're so good. But I was inarticulate. I was like, I don't know what to say about these except that they're fucking great. So it didn't work. Brooke.
Hi. Okay, you know how Reese's peanut butter cups are like Christmas trees or pumpkins or whatever? What is your favorite, and can you kind of like break it down very scientifically and specifically?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, sure. I think it is the Christmas tree.
Right.
Because
This is a request.
it was a leading question.
A
but she's
request
right.
to break down Reese's peanut butter cups in holiday shapes.
Yeah, the special
I'm
holiday shape
unfamiliar with
peanut
those. I'm
butter
learning
cup.
new things about candy.
Yeah, they're like this big and they come in single bags up at the register usually.
Oh,
So
yeah,
there's like
okay.
the egg for Easter, there's the heart for Valentine's Day, which looks saucy when you take it out of the wrapper. That's all we'll say about that. And there's the Christmas tree and there's a couple others. But the thing with the Christmas tree is that because you have the points, you have extra chocolate collecting as it's being poured over the thing, and that's why they're superior. Yes. Thank you.
Authority.
Vita.
What makes something candy?
What makes something a candy?
This is such a good question.
In here, which I love,
Yes.
but I just raises the broader like.
Okay, so the main thing about candy is that it has to be pleasurable, right? I think. Candy is usually sugar, but not necessarily. I'm trying to marshal my references and not go on too long is what's happening because, I think it's the 1912 Food and Drug Act was like the first national act that like regulated like food needing to be the food that it purported to be. Like if you were marketing something as milk, it had to actually be milk. Or if you said something was whole wheat, it had to actually have wheat in it, or else like you were breaking the law and you would be fined or whatever. Because we're like, it's like Upton Sinclair time. Like we're trying to figure it out. I hope we retain these things. What a time capsule we're in right now. Okay, but so the National Confectioners Association at the time lobbied to have an exception to this law establishing what foods should be, because candy was like often really technological. Like it would have these like bright colors and flavors and like ultra processed ways that it was made that didn't resemble anything else. So it was actually like legally declared that things that were candy didn't have to like have some sort of like natural or other referent to them. Like candy is a floating language system or something, right, nerds? So I think like it's actually really open, like what you declare candy to be. I really struggled with Peeps. Something about Peeps feels more snack than candy to me, but I have like no like cogent argument about that, right? I could say more, but thank you for letting me nerd out about the FDA.
Yeah, they're fringe. Marshmallows are fringe.
Okay, the thing about marshmallows is that like marshmallows were originally candy. Like you've ever had like homemade marshmallows, like homemade style that are like cut out. I'm sure there's some bougie store like right across the street that sells them. That's how marshmallows were at first, and then they were made industrially, like the jet puffed marshmallows and such. But apparently it's like a marketing coup to make them like bagged like a baking pantry staple. Like it was a big like push through like women's 1950s magazines and stuff, and I think that's like the reason that we have casseroles with marshmallows on them.
That sounds right. I can't think of another one.
Right, yeah.
More questions? We have time for one more.
Okay, Becca.
It's a regular question. So I love the origin story of this book so much, and I would like that to happen to me, but I'm like very allergic to any kind of prompt or suggestion, like you tell me what to write about, I just don't want to do it. How did you like push yourself, not just to do it once, but to do it 100 times?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was desperate, but I also just was tricking myself because I would say like, okay, I'll get up and write my candy. I called them candy. and then I'll like go do my real writing, right? Like very much like keeping it in the corner of your eye and like not taking it seriously. I declared it to be a secret project, and then I was told that secret projects are always the winner. Because you're not like over analyzing and you're not over editorializing. Like I would love to think of another thing that I can do 100 of because it was so fun. Also, it's been distracting me this whole time that Ross Gay's Inciting Joy is right next to this poetry book called Autopsy. Did y'all do that on purpose? So I mean, definitely a debt to this book, like looking very much like, the Book of Delights, and also 100 essays I don't have time to write, and like a lot of Sarah Mancuso's work. Like thinking of something that I definitely recommend like thinking of something that you can iterate over and over. But also like the whole book, like I'm teaching essays a lot right now, and the whole book is kind of like an essay with like a third rail that runs through it, right? It's one of those essays where it's like, is it Guernica that will have the like subheader that's like on NAFTA and dancing bears and like all the disparate things that are in the brilliant essay, just like held together by this arbitrary constraint, right? Like very like kitchen sink it, but just have like one thing that you're following through. So I think, but also literally like not being awake yet was super helpful. And not overthinking. Yeah.
The critic's not awake yet.
Yeah. And I do a lot of like labeling files like that, like play or experiment or test. Like if I do a big revision, I'll just, like if you turn something from first to second person or you suddenly, you're like, that's answer, but it's going to take too much work and I'm going to make a mess of it before it's better. Just like starting a new file and being like, I don't know. I'm just messing around here. Yeah.
Just like life.
Just like life. And there's, I guess also the nerdier answer is that like, I really am like a sentences person, I love to just write a great sentence and then write another one. Like I can't write with any noise on because I want to hear what's happening. And sometimes here I was just kind of following the sound into the next thing and just kind of like putting stuff into the sound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's next, Belle?
Well, we can.
So really quickly, just thank you all so much for being here. A couple reminders is that we have more books up front if you want to buy another one, because why wouldn't you want to buy another one? And if you're on the live stream, we also have books in the link in your description. Sarah is going to be signing in that kind of cubbyhole right here where my coworker is pointing. And I'm going to take Sarah right there, so if you want to hug and everything, that's where that would be happening. And then also if you could just pick up all your belongings. My coworkers are going to start breaking down the chairs, so that would be very helpful for that. Thank you all so much.
Thanks for coming, everyone. Can you just take a picture of everybody? I don't
No
have
one
mine.
move yet.
Don't move yet.
Okay. Should we have people wave?